Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. So today we are going to do something very exciting. We're going to start some Bhagavad Gita lessons. And why should we study Bhagavad Gita? Why are we here to study Bhagavad Gita? What's the benefit? Anybody? Kutasta. Auspicious? Auspicious. Right, it's more. So, Bhagavad Gita is one of the Upanishads. So just like the Vedas come from the breathing of Lord Vishnu. So like that Upanishad ka matlab hai, meaning of Upanishad means to be close to God. Upanishad, to be close to God. And why do we want to stay close to God? So Bhagavad Gita is one of the essence of all the Upanishads. It's the essence of all Upanishads. So it brings us close to God. It purifies our heart. It purifies our mind. It allows us to be completely fulfilled. So we can be really fulfilled and we will live our life as the highest human being. We want that, right? God has given us this special gift of this human body, very special human body. ये मनुष्य का जीवन है, ये बहुत अद्भुत जीवन है. ये you have to use this life for its purpose. So yes, that's why. So what will the Bhagavad Gita do? The Bhagavad Gita Upanishad is the essence of Upanishad. It's like the sun. What does the sun do? It gives us heat, it gives us warmth, beautiful light. What else does it do? Some very important thing the sun does. That plants grow, things grow. What else? Purifying. Wonderful. Thank you, Danny. Yes. Purify. So whatever you put on the water, dirty water, urine, anything, the sun will purify it. It doesn't care what you are. Right? Whether it's pure water or urine water, everything gets purified. So like that, the Bhagavad Gita, like we clean our body with soap and water. But how do we clean our heart? How do we clean our mind? How do we clean our consciousness? It's really important. That's more important than just the body. Right? Because you know the story of the bird in the cage. If you look after the cage, it's good. You get to clean the cage. You got to do that. But if you just clean the cage and you forget about the bird inside the cage, what will happen to the bird? It will die. So just like that, our Atma inside needs to be looked after, needs to be nurtured, needs to be, nurtured. Right? Yes, fed. Thank you. So yeah, we need our soul to be fed, to be nurtured. And how do we do that? Not with soap. How do we need to clean our soul? Not just by water and soap, but this you can do through Bhagavad Gita, through the Vedas. We can purify our heart, our mind, our consciousness. We can learn how to live. In the Bhagavad Gita will teach you how to eat, what to eat, what not to eat, what to drink, what not to drink, how to behave, how not to behave, how to have good relationships with yourself, with God, with everyone. So it's very important. So let's dive into that. I'm going to pass it on to my husband, Maheshwar Prabhu. He is a disciple of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada for 50 years. इसका दीक्षा लिया है उसने 50 साल. So he's been diving into these nectarines, Dharma, Sanatan Dharma, and taking advantage and living a life according to his spiritual master's teaching. So I hope all of you will take advantage of that. Thank you.
Timrandasya Gananjana Swakaya Chakshurumritanena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Pay our respects to Shri Shri Vadesham, Sitaram Lakshman Hanumanji, Lakshman Narayan Ki Jai, Shivaji Durgadevi Ki Jai, and Shri Ganesh Ji on the stage. So, this is obviously the first time I've spoken here. I speak at different venues, and it's always good to kind of get a sense of where everybody's at in the audience. So, I'm going to have some questions, and as you can see, my wife sort of introduced what we find is one of the best ways to actually teach Bhagavad Gita is to make it a little interactive. So it presses you and it challenges you to dig in your memory banks and try to remember maybe something you learned a long, long time ago when you were in grade school. I understand many places in India, they teach Bhagavad Gita, at least in the first couple of years of school. I don't know if they're still doing that, but I know that has been a tradition. So one of the first questions that I have is, how many people know what the main five subjects of Bhagavad Gita? What are the main 5 subjects in Bhagavad Gita? That's the reason why it's there. Does anybody want to venture some guesses as to what those would be? We're not trying to put anybody on the spot. We're going to, of course, Cheryl that here in a minute. But this is what we want to do, is if we understand what the main messages are that are in the Bhagavad Gita, then we'll actually be able to appreciate it and actually understand what it's teaching us. So if the technology works here properly, we're going to put the answers up on the overhead. So you can all look at the overhead. And these are the main 5 topics that are in Bhagavad Gita. And, well, I can't make it any bigger. Oh, maybe I can. Yeah, you need feedback if you can't see it. Is that a little better? Okay. So, and actually these topics are really very common. Everybody has questions about this. Every different society has questions about the first question here, which is the obvious thing what Bhagavad Gita is about, is who is God? Who is that personality of God? Or even, is God a personality? Here in America, a lot of people don't even think God has a personality. But we like to say, how can God not have a personality? When every single one of us in here has a personality. And in fact, if you plant a seed, if you get a package of seeds at the store, and you get, let's say, a bunch of tomato plants, and you plant the seeds, they don't all grow up exactly the same way. And actually, if you look closely, and we've all heard different metaphors, like if you were to take every blade of grass out of the ground and put it under a microscope, you'd find that they're all different too. So personality is everything, everywhere. There's personality everywhere you look. And yet, some people think that God doesn't have a personality. So how is that possible? God has everything. That means we'd have something that God doesn't have, and that doesn't make any sense. So the first thing that Bhagavad Gita talks about is who is God? Who is that Ishwar? Who is that controller? What are his characteristics? And how can he be understood? He's certainly not a personality like us, because we're so flawed and conditioned by the material world that we have difficulty even understanding simple things. So God has a very extraordinary personality, and he's not limited by the things that we're limited by. So, and as it says in the thing up there, it says, is God all-pervasive? A void? Is he love? Some people say, very popular nowadays, people say God is love. I actually got an email from somebody or a Facebook message. Somebody said God is love, and he said, no, he's not love. Love is one of his characteristics. God is a personality who has a lot of love. But people are not properly thinking this out. Okay? Is he an individual? Is he feared? There's some scriptures that teach fear God. Should you be feared? Is that a loving relationship if you're fearful of God? No, we should be loving God, which means he should be lovable, which means everything he does has got to be for the benefit of everybody, because that's the nature of God. So these are the different concepts that are out on the street. So this is one of the things Bhagavad Gita deals with. Who is God? What is his personality? What are his characteristics? What does he look like? The Vedic literatures are the only literatures on the face of this earth that actually give us a description of what God looks like. Okay? Some of the other scriptures give ideas about some aspects of him, but only in the Vedic literatures you find some really thorough descriptions of what he looks like, what he's wearing, who he's hanging out with, what he likes to eat, what he does, what his pastimes are. So this is one of the main topics. Obviously, this is the foremost topic of Bhagavad Gita. Who is God? Because there's a lot of confusion out there right now. And I have to say, you know, I was a typical Maleccia-born Western person. I have nothing to hang on to. I could see, I was raised in all these different traditions, and I could see the different philosophies, and well, we don't mean to be pejorative about anything, because everybody's doing the best that they can, but they just weren't answering the questions. They just didn't have the answers I was looking for. You know, so when I was fortunate enough, and I was a young gentleman, and I realized, I met the devotees who I eventually joined, and they asked me this question, and they said, or they more or less made a statement, they said, every single person is condemned with 4 flaws. Propensity to cheat, propensity to make mistakes, imperfect senses, and a propensity to fall under illusions. Now, how do you think you could figure anything out on your own if you're honest enough to admit those 4 flaws? You know, Kali Yuga is characterized by people running around who are completely in denial about those 4 flaws. No, I'll sit here and meditate for 15, 20 minutes every day, and maybe 15, 20 minutes a day, and I'll figure it all out. Now, how is it possible? How is it possible? We all have to acknowledge that certainly hardly a day goes by where we make some mistake. So right there, then whatever you're concluding on your own efforts, how do you know that's the correct conclusion? What to speak of, we've all been entertained. If you go to some magic show someplace and you see them cut the lady in half and you move over, and it's like, oh, how do you do that? Because it's an illusion. And we have the propensity to fall under illusions. And in that situation, we go to be entertained by how easily illusioned we are. But in day-to-day life, we might see something and think it's one thing, or interpret somebody's behavior and think it's one thing and not realize, no, that's not what it is. Because we have that propensity to make mistakes and fall under illusions. And we have imperfect senses. I can't see what's behind. I have to keep looking around, make sure the screen has what I have on my screen. Because I don't have eyes behind my head. What to speak of, there could be radon gas in this temple right now, and we could all be dying and we wouldn't even know it because we'd have no way of perceiving it. So how good are our senses? And finally, the one that very few people like to admit, it's the propensity to cheat. Although if you're paying attention to the news, there's so many reports of people getting cheated. They're getting identity theft. There's people that are scheming, people in the Moda Ignis. Their whole livelihood is to cheat you. What to speak of when we do our taxes, we're always trying to figure out, well, I don't want to pay any more than I have to. Right? And the biggest form of cheating is when somebody pretends to know something when they don't actually know it. If you've ever given your computer to somebody who says, oh, I know all about computers, and maybe they do, maybe they don't. Same thing with your car. If you give your car to somebody and say, oh, I'll fix your car. Maybe they know a little bit about mechanics, but maybe they are talking bigger than they actually know. That's a form of cheating. And where we see that more than anywhere else is when it gets down to having these discussions that what Bhagavad Gita is here to resolve, is what ultimately is the purpose of life. There's so many philosophers and so many people out there saying so many things. And we always, when I talk to people and they come with all their ideas, I always say, where'd you get that idea from? Oh, I heard it from this person. Well, where did he get the idea from? And that's why we have in the Vedic tradition this thing called parampara. this disciplic succession. There is no speculation in the Parampara. You're supposed to hear it from your teacher, and you're supposed to repeat it the way the teacher repeats it. Just like the mailman takes your message, your letter, he doesn't open it up, and I think if you change a few words here in the letter, and we'll send it off and see what happens. No, he delivers the letter unadjusted, unedited. And in our tradition is the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, meaning that Lord Brahma is the first created living entity, and he heard the message of Godhead directly from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It says in the the Srimad Bhagavatam, which you have set up on your top shelf there, that he sat for thousands of years. There was nothing in the universe at all, and then he heard the word tapa. Tapapa means austerity. And then he meditated on that, and he was trying to figure out, well, what am I supposed to do here? He's coming out of the navel of Lord Karanodakshai Vishnu, and he's saying, what am I doing here? And eventually Krishna gave him the instructions, you're supposed to create, remanifest everything in the material world. And then from Brahma, he went to Brahma Madhva. Madhva is about the 13th century, and he's the next major acharya in our lineage. Brahma Madhva Gaudiya means Lord Caitanya in Bengal. We won't go into too much detail about any of these personalities. But the point is, and these are the prominent acharyas, and then eventually handed down to my spiritual master's guru, which was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who was a major mover and shaker in India in the early 1900s. Started the Gaudiya Math, opened up hundreds of temples. And then, of course, my spiritual master went and heard from him. He was also, at that time, India hadn't quite achieved independence. And so he was leaning towards, the independent movement. And Bhaktisiddhanta said, why are you wasting your time with independence? You kick out the British and somebody else takes over, but is that the purpose of your life? To politics? There's a much higher purpose than politics. And he impressed upon him, the most important thing is to understand who you are, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and ultimately giving your consciousness or placing your or restoring your relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's the purpose of life. So that's what the message of Bhagavad Gita is. So let's go to the next one. What constitutes life? I mean, nowadays people are talking about all sorts of things. They can't even tell the difference between a man and a woman nowadays. They listen to the news. There's controversy over that. But to speak of what is life, we're not going to get into it, but I mean, there's a lot of controversy. I mean, it's very clear. Life begins when the woman's impregnated. That's when life begins. It's not 6 months later, 8 months. They're arguing. There's all political arguments. But that's all politics. But it's very clear. If you're a clear thinker, that's when life begins. And what constitutes life? What distinguishes a man from an animal? The animals are all busy just chasing, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. That's the only thing animals predominantly are concerned about. Where am I going to find something to eat? Who do I have to defend myself from? If a tiger's coming after me, I have to be careful. Eating, sleeping, and they sleep whenever they can, either at night if they're a day animal or during the day if they're a nocturnal animal. And then mating, they're finding some mate. How can I increase my tribe? But that's not what humans are meant for. We're going to do that, but if that's all we do, then how are we any different than the animals? We're just, the word in Sanskrit is dvipada pashu. You're just a two-legged animal, if that's the only thing you're interested in doing. But the Gita calls you to be more than that. No, you have the intelligence, you have the brain to understand I'm suffering. And what are we suffering from? Adhyatmic, adhidaivic, adhibhotic miseries. Miseries from the demigods. We just had an earthquake. Most people here are probably in Ventura County. We know why we had an earthquake last Sunday, I think it was, or within the last week. Nothing can do anything about that. That's a misery. Hopefully nobody was too damaged. But I mean, in places around the country, they're having hurricanes and tornadoes, and their houses are getting wiped out, and floods are coming, and all these miseries are there by the demigods. And then you have miseries from other living entities. It may be your landlord's kicking you out. Now you have a problem. Now you have a misery. You have to deal with it. Or you may have a really lousy boss, or your neighbor might be a horrible person and they're constantly giving you grief. Other living entities are causing problems. And it's not fun, but you have to deal with it. And then finally, your own body, especially as we get older, right? When you're younger, we have a tendency to kind of take our body and our health for granted. But as we get older, we go, oh, wait a minute, I've got a problem here in my back now. We can't do as much as we get older. So those are the three major miseries. What to speak of the one we all know, samsara, birth, death, old age, and disease. That's right, that's always the cycle. That's the samsara cycle. It's going around all the time. So you have these 7 different types of miseries. So why do you want to stay here? My spiritual master said, if you're an intelligent person and you recognize these 7 miseries and you don't do anything about it, you're a fool. Because you're just going to stay on that record, round and round and round. Because we all know the Hindu temple, obviously, the reincarnation is not under discussion here. In some of the places I go, they debate whether there's even reincarnation. That's a whole different lecture for those people. But here, we all know reincarnation. What is it based on? Yam yam va pisparandavam tyajat yanti kalebram tom tom tikunteya sadata bhavita. Right there in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, text 11, it says, whatever state of being you remember when you leave this body, that state is where you're going to go. So if you spend your whole life wasting your time watching baseball games, you'll turn into a baseball or something of that effect. Right? So if you, I jokingly say here, and we all see this in Ventura County, there's all these surfers out there, right? And if you look quickly, you kind of go, oh, they look like seals, right? The seals that swim in the ocean. If they want to swim in the ocean all the time with their wetsuits and they love surfing the water, Krishna said, okay, you want to do that? Well, I'll just put you in the body of a seal and you can go out there and be a seal for how many lives you want to do that until you finally realize, well, this is very much fun, actually. And I still have to deal with eating, sleeping, mating, defending, and birth, disease, old age. So Krishna's very kind. He actually gives us the ability. He says, I'll give you the ability to do whatever you want. Even if you want to ignore me, I'll give you the ability to do that. He gives that Maya potency. You want to forget me? Okay, forget me. He's not, one of the beautiful things about Krishna, he has 6 opulences, and one of those opulences is he's completely renounced. He doesn't need your attention. He wants it because it's better for both you, not so much better for him, but his heart is for you. He said, why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you creating so much trouble for yourself? You don't need to do this, but your free will is there, you can do it. But when are you going to finally get with the program and make, maybe I ought to read Bhagavad Gita and get a little bit more wise here and figure out what's going on. So what are the jivas? What constitutes a living entity? The next thing that's discussed in Bhagavad Gita is what is the difference between matter and spirit? I did a spiritual IQ test. We've talked to the Shastraji and Mahesh Talwar about introducing some of these things. We're kind of following whatever they want us to do. We have a 10-point spiritual IQ test. And one of the questions on the spiritual IQ is, what is the difference between matter and spirit? And you can't believe how many people get that question wrong. What is the difference between matter and spirit? So the Bhagavad Gita is able to tell you what is Prakriti, what is material nature. And it gives more information about the mechanics of how the world works. The Vedas are so wonderful. They don't leave anything unanswered. It's all there. That's what's, it's just so astonishing. Again, born in a molecular Western world of Judeo-Christianity, which is, okay, that's fine. They're doing what they're doing. We don't want to stop anything. That's not our position. But the questions are just not answered here. And I can't tell you how many times I've asked questions in different spaces and they'll say, it's a stock answer. God works in mysterious ways. Well, thank you. That really doesn't help a whole lot. Right? What's that? There's truth in it, but it's kind of like saying God works in mysterious ways and we haven't got a clue as to how it works. Well, we might want to start thinking about reincarnation a little bit. Because I've actually asked this question many times. How is it that a fair God will put one person in a very beat up, ugly, hard body in a very distressed place, way out in the back hills of Calcutta someplace, or even the Mojave Desert, and they're scraping through the earth to eat worms. And then you have people born in America with millions of dollars, very attractive, and they're wasting money and just living on top of it all. How does a fair God do that if there's no reincarnation? There's no sane answer to that question. They literally blank out. But at least in Hindu tradition, that's a real good answer to that question. Because some people earned whatever response, met back to yum yum vapi spramanam. The person who was born in a bad situation got born, if they wanted to practice being a seal, then Krishna's nothing. We'll put you in a body of a seal, so you don't have to put all that wetsuit on, you don't have to go home at night, you don't have to worry about work, and you just float right and hang around in the ocean as long as you want. But watch out, because there may be a shark that will decide to make you dinner, so we're back into eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. We got that problem. So if you're really smart, you go like, wait a minute, there's something here. So when I had those 4 flaws thrown at me when I was in college sometime, I realized that I had to do something about it. Okay, it's a matter of time. It's supposed to end at 5:25, I believe it is. 5:25? Huh? Okay, well, anyhow, we're not going to go through all these today. One of the things we like to do in our programs, because remember this is very interactive, is we always try to give when we give a presentation, we always like to open it up for questions. So if anybody has questions, we have a few minutes. You don't have to ask questions, but sometimes they say something. Learning occurs, and sometimes it's not like in a lot of the different traditions here in America. But you go and you hear the sermon and that's it. Sermon's over, go home, eat your donuts and go home. But we like to be more, no. Maybe I've said something that's not clear. Maybe I've said something that somebody wants to comment on. So in our tradition, we've always asked if there's any questions. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to stand.
What does Bhagavad Gita mean in English, like when it's translated?
The Song of God. I think most people here know that. Some places we go, they don't know that, but I'm pretty sure everybody here knows that.
So Lord Krishna is considered Bhagavan?
Yes, that's the name of God. That's a reference to God.
That's one of his many names?
Well, that's a reference to God.
Reference.
We have a card. Krishna is the original first name. But he has many names. I mean, we all know that Vishnu Sahasranam. It's just thousands and thousands of names that are being repeated. I think they sung it for him a few times. Anything else? We're getting a sign language here. Share more. I think he's getting more minutes. 5 more minutes. Okay. 5 more minutes. Anyhow, I would like to also really thank Charlie and Mahesh Talwar for inviting us to come here and make a presentation. If everybody is satisfied and they'd like to see more and have more of these kind of presentations, we're prepared to do it. Everything's sort of up to the desire of the congregation, and that's what he likes to do. But I've been doing this sort of thing for about 40 years, going to different venues, and it's a tremendous honor to be here at the Hindu Temple.
Can you just summarize the 5 essence of Bhagavad?
Well, they're right on the screen here.
Can you just go through it? Can't read that.
You can't read that?
No.
What is the difference between, okay, we did that, there's only 2 more. How does time affect things? Call it time. The physicists say there's actually a 4th dimension, right? 4th dimension, length, width, height, and then time. And a lot of the modern physics nowadays are really starting to understand how time affects things. In fact, the theory of relativity is all based on how fast the speed of light goes, and that in terms of time, it all interacts together. So the Bhagavad Gita talks about time. How does time affect things? There is no time in the spiritual world. That's a factor in the material world. And we can feel it. We're constantly getting older. We may remember ourselves as a young child, and we don't think of ourselves there, but we look in the mirror and go, where's the young child's body? That's gone, finished. We're not the body. That body's gone. So time is affecting us. And then the last thing in Bhagavad Gita that's there is what constitutes good action. And this seems like an obvious question. What constitutes good action? Plato spent his entire life trying to figure out what the difference is between good and bad. And he had some good ideas, but he didn't have the authority of Bhagavad Gita. And if you think that this is easy to answer, there's actually people, I'm ashamed to say this, but there are people who translated the Bhagavad Gita, and I'm not going to mention names, and they've omitted the last 6 chapters, because the last 6 chapters are all about the modes of nature, the divine and demoniac. And what are those chapters about? Krishna's spelling it out. These are what's in the mode of goodness, these are what's in the mode of ignorance, and these are what's in the mode of passion. And I have a chart, and you can just go down it, and you can check off which one of those behaviors do you do the most. And I'm sure most people here are probably going to be leaning very heavily in the mode of goodness. Most people are very heavily involved in the mode of passion.
What's the Sanskrit terms for that?
Rajagun, Tamagun, and Sattvagun. Okay? So the Bhagavad Gita lays it all out. It doesn't leave it for question. But because there's so many people, and believe me, in Ojai, we're surrounded. It's all over the place, but it seems like Ojai's a vortex for this sort of stuff. You know, I mean, I don't know how many people run into this, but it's the kind of people where everybody says, don't be judgmental. Well, why not? Krishna's very judgmental. He says, this is what ignorant. You act like this, you're ignorant. But they are so opposed to even understanding what the difference is between goodness, passion, and ignorance that they don't even want to read what Krishna, so they translate Bhagavad Gita, they'll translate the first 12 chapters. So this is the kind of world we're in, so we're trying to just, I mean, everybody here is so fortunate. You have a diamond in your hand. And we want everybody to really realize, don't be ashamed of it. The British tried to shame the Indians into being quiet, and they did all sorts of things. Max Mueller came to India, his intention was to find fault. I think it was the Germans who sent him, and tried to discourage and disgrace the Indians. They have this silly religion. And Max Mueller studied his books, and after he got done studying, he said, no, you got it backwards. They have fantastic books, and you guys over here in Europe don't know what the hell you're doing. And he became one of the greatest translators of the Sanskrit language, particularly the Mona Samhita and several other books of that nature. So we're trying to create some fire here. You have everything to feel really good about. And take it from me in the Legiborn Western. It's fantastic. Hare Krishna, thank you very much.
So not only huge, a thunder round of applause for Vaishudasi. The deliver beautiful discourse of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. बहुत शुभ दिन है आज का दिन. It is very auspicious day. It is the Ekadashi, the Pavitra Ekadashi of Shravan.